Welcome to The Change Agent, the podcast that aims to help you become a more effective leader, project manager, and high-impact contributor to your organization. Each episode gives you actionable strategies and perspectives in leadership, project management, and team building, so you and your team can deliver real value, exceed expectations, and rise above the rest. Follow the show, as every week I try to release new content. I hope you're looking forward to today's episode, and if so, get ready and let's get to it. Hey everyone, welcome back and welcome to episode 7 of season 2. I'm Eric, and today we are going to be applying some of the concepts and practices that we've learned during the initiation of the kickoff project. So when we talked about initiating projects and kicking them all off, now's the time. Now, in the previous episode, we did experiences in leadership, where we kind of just went off the rails a little bit and talked about things that happened in my leadership journey. But now we're back to the boring stuff, the textbook definitions and all that good stuff, to really get into the beginning of project management and how to kick off projects and get ready. So the goal here is to revisit a lot of the previous discussions and begin laying out what starting off looks like, right? And this is in the traditional sense of project management. So as we reference the PMBOK Guide 7th edition, as always, please remember what we've said before, that the guide, the 7th edition of the PMBOK Guide, has moved out of this focus of a traditional linear approach to project management and more into the principles of project management. They're not the same. So it used to be that you had process groups and you had all these things in place and you kind of followed this linear fashion of what you would do first, then next, and what's next, and what's next, until you got to the closing process. But now we are changing that. The PMI group, the Project Management Institute, has changed that. The PMBOK Guide now follows a bit more flexible and adaptive approach. This is based on the principles of project management. So now we won't have this step-by-step list of things to do, but we will be moving into a principles-based approach, which allows us to be flexible, adaptive, responsive, and creative on how we want to approach projects. So yay, you as a PM now have a bit more freedom to feel like you're doing the right thing, right? Because there were a lot of people who have, one of the complaints that I've heard about traditional PMP certification holders was that what I've learned is not always applicable, and it's difficult for me to know to pick what I've learned and apply it to some actual real world experience. That's just some people I've talked to. There are some that have said that it works out perfectly. I myself, in my experience, I've had it both ways. So I'm kind of right up the middle. So let's go ahead and get to this. So congratulations. You've been picked up as the new project manager for a project, and you're ready to get in there and show them what you've got, right? You've been assigned. This is one of your first projects, or maybe it can be a larger one than you've done before, but let's kind of assume like maybe it's one of the first ones you've got. So before you get started, there are likely some core items that you need to handle first, right? Let's look at some of what these are and what you might want to consider doing after you've been assigned this new project. Now, these things can align most directly with what is known as initiation of the project, or initiating the project, right? All right, so some key goals, right, that you want to accomplish when you first are assigned as a project manager to a project. You're going to want to have some goals in mind. The first one will be to read literature on the project. You should have had access to this before at some point, about some literature about the project. I mean, hopefully you didn't just walk in on a Monday and never heard of this project before, and your manager says, "Congratulations, Eric, you're now the project manager for project A. You've never heard of it. Let me know if you have any problems." And he just bolts, right? So yeah, it's probably not a most favorable outcome or introduction to project management. That will be very stressful. But let's assume that you've gotten some access to literature prior to that. And this is where we're going to really get an understanding of the scope of the work. This is what you'll be doing. The work you're tasked to do, along with the project outline, needs to fit into this scope. So meaning there's a scope statement somewhere, or some type of scope thing, right? We'll talk more about this in just a few minutes, but whatever the work is you're doing needs to align with the scope of the project. If it doesn't, you have a real risk of violating a contract and creating large issues. So let me give you a real basic example. I'm hiring Eric to build a fence, and he has to use metal fence posts with wooden planks. It needs to be 6 feet high and run the entire length of the yard in all directions, in which, the front, the back, and then on the sides, of course. And in the middle of this, he's hired to do that. I pay him, I agree to pay him a certain amount. And then in the middle of him putting out posts, and he's gotten 5 or 6 of them laid, I tell him I also want him to string lights, right? I want you to string lights all around the edges of this thing so that I have some backyard ambient lighting. That's not in scope. That was not identified as part of the project. And so Eric would have to decide on whether he will accept the change and then change the cost. Because again, all these things matter. If you increase the scope, you increase the cost. Time is also possibly increased. So these iron triangles that I talked about before, time, scope, cost, these things are all dependent on one thing or another. If you change one, you change something else. So don't run the risk of violating a contract if you're doing things out of scope. You might want to ask yourself, what's the value of this contract? How much is it worth? How is it going to be funded? Who's paying me? Who controls that project funding? Is it Eric or is it Eric's wife? Who are the stakeholders? Who are the people that I'm working with? These are the ones that I'm working with, the ones I'm working for, and the people that are impacted by the fence. My neighbor, if I were to put up a fence, my neighbor would be a stakeholder because it impacts him or her. What does success look like? When it's completed, what does that look like? What is the acceptable deliverable state? What is being delivered? And what is the high-level schedule that you're going to follow? And what has been done already, if anything? So these are some questions you want to really ask about whether or not you're, ready to begin the next phase. Of all the above items, they generally would come from a project charter, which is a document which can be simple or complex that really outlines or covers those things. Next, we want to look at some key outputs. Answering the previous questions would have already been able to allow us to generate some artifacts of some sort that we could use to reference later. But what we're trying to do is create some outputs from this initial investigation of these questions, which are these things. The project charter. This is the document which outlines what the project is. It has a high-level scope statement. It's got the business case in there. It's probably got some reference to a project manager, you. It has a stakeholder register or stakeholder map maybe existing in these. This is an output. This is an output. You may output a high-level schedule from answering those questions in the beginning. You may have a high-level set of budget estimates or cost estimates. And you may have an identified management approach, how you're going to handle this. Will this be a predictive, agile, or hybrid management approach that you're going to take? Now, why is getting this initial phase right? It's very important that we get this initiating piece correct. It's important to know that getting it right from the start helps us build that tone for the rest of the project. But it also does 3 primary other things. It allows us to ensure that we are aligning everything we're doing with the strategic goals of the business. It clarifies expectations early and reduces possible rework later on. And then lastly, it establishes the initial trust and authority needed to manage and navigate the project. When you have that initiating phase and you're getting that all set up and ready, and you kind of got yourself on, you got the project charter and you've been identified as the project manager, that's where you officially get that authority to operate as the PM and to make decisions, and you need to take advantage of that. Now we're ready to start planning and initiating this thing, really getting into it, right? So we've done some basic initiating of the project. We've done some basic research. We understand some things. We've got some primary documents, but now we're ready to get into the meat of initiating and planning this thing, because the initiating part is everything we just discussed, but then there are some plans and stuff that you need to get into. So we're gonna begin with some planning. Not some, actually, a lot. And I've noted before that planning is a very heavy focus in project management, and it's super critical that you don't overlook it. This isn't only about making plans as output to our exercises that we're doing, but it's about putting all of the pieces together to draft out what a successful project will look and feel like as it moves through that life cycle. So to be sure that we've gotten all the critical information that we need to be successful, there are several things that we need to kind of do. And these are not an all-inclusive list of things that we need to address, but they are the primary things you'll want to do to make sure that as you initiate this project, you've got a high level plan and you've gotten through the initiating part of it, and you're ready to go to actually start feeling comfortable about executing this project. So let's get into a couple of these things that we're going to want to do. We're going to want to first revisit the scope of the work. We want to know that we want to get into the weeds of the work that what we're doing, and we want to ensure that all the requirements that are supposed to be met are known, and we need to know what is expected of us. Once we've gotten an idea of the scope and we've read the scope statement and we've read some other things and we know exactly what it is that the customer is expecting, then we want to start creating the work breakdown structure or backlogs. Now, this is where we break down the work into small packages and what most people know as the work breakdown structure, or the WBS. Or if you're in Agile, it's in backlog, depending on what approach you're using. But to go with the WBS, simply the WBS is a list or a group of work packages that contain some unique identifier for each one of those tasks that align with a referenced section of the requirements document. Now that sounds kind of complex, but let's look at this a little bit more. The requirements document can be something like the statement of work, which could be taken from a request for a proposal or a request for information released by some customer. So company A needs someone to build a system or build an infrastructure or build some software. They will release a request for a proposal or an RFP, which will contain requirements and all this other information that will show you what kind of the background of the contract will look like. And in there, you will generate what the work might look like as that's required to complete that. The backlog is created in Agile practice. The backlog is created from a collaboration sessions between you, the product owner, and the sponsor. Now, these are listed and then what they call groomed. So this is something that means adjusted and re-ranked or reprioritized as needed by the product owner. So your sponsor may have company A may have a particular goal in mind to create some software, and they task Eric to be the product owner, and they tell him what the strategy is, what the business objectives are, what the end user might want. And then it's up to Eric to make sure that all of the things, the work that's created and done by the Agile teams, these are called stories and features and epics, they all align with the product backlog. And if anything changes from a sponsor's point of view, the Eric grooms that, which is I add additional stories, I add additional features, I remove them, but only the product owners are allowed to do that. Anyway, the product owner is a prime stakeholder as they understand the product vision, right? They're the ones who understand what the sponsors are looking for. They manage the backlog, they don't do the work, and they ensure that items in the backlog align with expectations that would deliver the expected product to the end user or other stakeholders. And so you're going to assign, after that's completed, you're going to assign a system of time, some type of system you're going to use for time duration of these items. So you could use hours, you could use days, you could use month. If you're in an Agile world, you're going to look at velocity, which is generated from the use of points in stories. But simply, you're really just trying to figure out how long will it take to do these parts of the work. Once you've completed that, you're ready to move on to the schedule. So you're going to start creating some type of schedule. Now, you take the time durations from, say, your WBS, and you apply all of those to a schedule in some sort. Now, you can have specific or estimated dates if you don't have anything else, but it's important to know and plan for activities that are dependent on other activities. This is kind of the thought of it's a finish then start relationship. I finish task A and then I'll start task B, and I can't start task B until task A is completed. Now, you want to plan for issue resolutions, you want to plan for problems, you want to try to calculate available time between phases and work plans for things to move along. This time that you have in between these things are called float. So for example, if task A finishes on a Monday and then the next step, task B, starts on Wednesday, you have a 1 day of float in there. Now, there are two different types of float. We won't go into a full detail here, but here's some ideas, some concepts. There are two types of float. There's free float and there's total float. Now, total float represents the amount of time that an activity can be delayed without delaying the project's overall completion date. So this is you do everything you can to make sure that you don't delay the end of the project. Free float represents the amount of time an activity can be delayed without delaying the early start of the next one. So float, with what I described earlier, that task A finishes on Monday and B starts on Wednesday, that would be your free float, right? Because that's the project A finishing on time or early, but hopefully not late. It could be one day late. It could finish on Tuesday and the other project could still start on Wednesday. The other task could still start on Wednesday. But there are methods for calculating all this, but that's for another day. I have a limited amount of time after all. So now that you've got your durations and everything, and you know the work you're going to be doing, you're going to take that and you're going to look at the resources that are used to do these tasks, maybe apply the rate per hour for those resources, and it helps you build out cost estimates. Okay, this will help you understand your funding needs, and most likely you're submitting this in a response to an RFP. And if you are, or doing something like that, you're going to have a team of finance professionals that'll help you build out cost plans and volumes that'll enable you as the PM to see how far financially in forward you'll be, how you'll end up financially, and other things. So is your price going to be higher than what the customer asked? Will it be lower than what the customer is expecting? There are three different terms I want to tell you right now while they're on the top of my mind that relate to cost and these plans, these budgets. The first one is called the VAC, Victor Alpha Charlie, the variance at completion. That's what VAC stands for, variance at completion. This is how much difference there will be between the baseline estimate of cost and the actual amount, right? So if you're estimating at completion that you're going to be at $100 and you're currently showing 90, then you have a variance of 10, right? Positive. Your estimate to completion is the amount of money that you would need to complete the project from where it is now to the end date. So I need $10 more to complete the project is my ETC. My estimate at completion, or EAC, is the amount of money that I would have spent when the project finishes. That helps you build out your variance at completion. So you just kind of keep those in mind. The variance at completion is the difference between the baseline estimate of what you have and where the actuals are. Your ETC is your estimate to complete, and that's the amount of time or money that you would need to complete the project from where it is now. And your EAC is the time or money that you would have spent when the project finishes, depending on what you're asking. Most of the time they apply these to financials. Well, we got that part done. Now we're moving into something else, something a little bit more scary. This is the risks. Now we want to begin looking at those because it's very important that we understand where they are early up front in the project. Developing a risk register and logging them is extremely important. You want to try to get those on paper, get them on some document, and you want to categorize those and assign them to someone for each one of those risks and begin developing the strategies that you would use to address them so that they don't become issues. Now, there are four primary types of risk responses that you'll see as you study PM content, if you will. The four different types of things that you'll see related to risk are avoiding, transferring, mitigating, and accepting. So avoiding a risk is simply you just try to avoid it at all cost. Okay. It's you perform an action to avoid it. The next one would be transfer. You transfer that risk to someone else or some other organization. A really good example of this is insurance. You have car insurance. If you have car insurance and you've got it's valid and everything's good to go, you're transferring the risk of an accident to someone else. And then if something happens and you're not at fault, then you get paid to have your car fixed or replaced. To mitigate risk is to do what you can to reduce the impact or severity of it once it happens. And then accepting it is you do absolutely nothing. Yeah, I accept the risk of driving without insurance. And so that's probably a very free will way to do it. You want to try to accept as little risk as possible. You want to have at least some mitigation, some transfer, and some avoid in there if you want to. But most of the time, most groups will mitigate or transfer risk if possible. You could also transfer risk by having a subcontractor. If you're working on a contract and you want to do something, you could transfer that risk by transferring all of the work that's dealing with that to a subcontractor to make them um, more liable for it. But what the strategy for that is think of it this way. We're building software. We don't have software developers, but company A does. We run the risk of not being able to execute against the contract requirements because we don't have software developers or we don't think we can hire them. We can transfer that risk over to company B, who does specialize in software development, and that risk is then mitigated or transferred. Okay. Next, you go on to talk about, we want to look at communications, right? So we want to have a communications plan of some sort. This is where we're going to decide how, when, and with whom you're going to communicate. Now, these plans, all of them that we're talking about are living documents. They, as stakeholders change, the documents change. As communication changes, risk may change. All of these things may happen. So just keep in mind that these documents are in place. But the communications plan is really where you're talking about who I'm going to talk to, how often, under what circumstances, and how I'm going to do it. It's going to be telephone. Is it going to be a Teams call? Will I go and see them? Face to face is usually best if you can do it. And then next, you're going to want to move into the team readiness. This is like really the kind of the last bit you're going to have to really worry about, team readiness. This is where you're going to start building and onboarding the team if you don't have one. So you're going to prepare. What are you going to prepare? These things. You're going to have a clear and detailed job position requirement and ensure that those requirements from the customer are clearly annotated as a requirement to be awarded an offer letter. If your customer says that Eric has to have a PMP to be the PM, you can't hire someone without it unless there's some exception given. So have those clearly delineated in the job posting. Detailed alignment between the company's internal job title or labor category to the external labor category from the customer. If the customer defines what labor categories you will have and they provide you with a rate table of labor categories, you're going to make sure that Eric, as a PM, has an internal job title called Project Manager Senior or something, and that it aligns with, in all ways, both in requirement and times of service and like education requirements, with the labor category rate table from a customer. If the customer doesn't give you those things and they don't care who you hire, well, then it's really on you, right? But then it just falls to that one half of the equation. You make sure you hire the right people that do the right job. You don't hire a PM to be a software developer. You hire a PM to run the project, and you hire a software developer to develop software. So you just keep those aligned and make sure they're done. And then next, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to want to do a education session between your recruiting team, if necessary, on what you're looking for in the successful candidate. Don't leave them to always figure it out, especially for highly technical positions. There are some cases in which your recruiting team can effectively hire technical experts, but it's always a good idea to sit down with them and say, look, what I'm really looking for are software development experts who are experts in Python, React.js, Apache, whatever the language is, PHP, HTML, CSS, whatever the program language is that you're looking for. And then you're going to determine the type of interview that you're going to want to be using to get the best assurance that you hired the right candidate. Is it going to be a technical interview, a conversational one? Are you going to have them solve a problem? Is there going to be multiple interviews? Like I'm going to have a gate, like first you interview with us, and then you interview with them, and then you interview with them. And if you get through these three, you're good. Once you've completed all that and you've hired people, you're going to start building that team, and you're going to have a kickoff meeting using all that you've gathered so far to ensure that everyone understands what the team is doing and that everyone's on the same level field. And then you're going to introduce that team and any leads inside that team to the customer at the earliest possible time to begin establishing some relationships with the customer. Your role now is you've kicked everything off and you've gotten it done. What do you do now? So your role now is to be the connector of the team. You're going to be connecting the team to the stakeholders, team members to team members, functional managers to leads, management and customers to each other, whatever the cases are. You're going to be the connector. You're also going to be the translator. You're going to convert strategy into executable steps. Then you're going to be the motivator. You're going to set the tone, motivate, lead the team, provide purpose, trust, clarity, fairness, transparency, and predictability to your actions. And then lastly, you're going to be ready for change because they are coming. Even the best design plans have deviations, so prepare for those as well. So congratulations, we've received and accepted our assignment as the PM, and we're done doing these critical things to ensure that we have a successful start. But remember that this is just the beginning. There's a whole lot more to be done, but at least now we're armed with the concept of what initiating the project looks like. And I'm sure that you're going to do a really good job and you're going to master it. So for the rest of this season, throughout now, which is episode 7 through 15, we're going to be moving along this project as a team. We're going to kind of keep these scenarios going as a team. That's it for this episode. If you found it helpful, please subscribe to the podcast and make sure to leave a review. Don't forget to share this show with your friends and colleagues and provide us some recommendations on how we can improve the podcast. And if you have any specific topics you'd like to discuss, send them our way. If you'd like more information on how to engage with me directly, you can head over to kalina-vision.com. That's KALYN as in Nancy A-vision.com. And you can also catch me on YouTube at Beyond the Glare or your favorite podcast platform to learn more and see how we can help you and your team get to the next level. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time.